welcome to the Beacon Beat.
Thank you for having me.
This is an interview series that we're doing, which is exploring what it means to be a supply chain leader in today's world. So we run through with our guests the highs, lows, challenges they face, technology used, and everything in between. So I'm AJ from Beacon, supply chain intelligence platform, and I'm thrilled to welcome Kevin. Kevin started out in the supply chain function at Sainsbury's and progressed to be the supply chain director at Screwfix for over 7 years. So welcome, Kevin, to the first episode of the Beacon Beat.
Thank you
first episode. So we're starting big. This is going to be big shoes to fill.
And you go up from here.
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to go down from here. No pressure on the next guest.
Yeah.
So your start in supply chain, how did you actually end up in supply chain? Was it a deliberate choice or did it find you?
I think like about 99% of the people end up in supply chain. It wasn't deliberate because unfortunately there's not really much of a supply chain path or career. People tend to fall into it. So it definitely found me. I was working in Sainsbury's as a student and I got a little bit obsessed and interested in terms of what customers were buying, why they were buying it, and relating that to the displays in store, the POS, the position on the shelf. I was quite obsessed with all that, and I thought it's quite interesting how all this works. Who is doing all this analysis to understand what kind of customers were buying and why they're buying it? And I've been fascinated ever since by what customers do, why they do it. And that created the path really in supply chain. So the moment there was an opportunity to join the supply chain, I took it. And at the time, it was when a lot of companies were centralising forecasting. The systems had come online to be able to do that. So it was moving away from quite simplistic store-based ordering to more complicated, wholly system-based planning. So yeah, I got a great opportunity to move to London in the early days of Sainsbury's supply chain. That was just when supply chain was just being created. Can you believe companies didn't used to have supply chains?
So talk me through those early years at Sainsbury's around, like, what was the process that you went through to like replenish a store or to make sure that everything was in the store that was needed?
I mean, it was fairly simplistic. You as a forecaster, you'd be thinking about your seasonality. So have you got a fairly flat seasonal profile, or is there something that's very much impacted by weather, time of year, or any kind of event? So you're trying to get you're getting a clear abreast of that. The biggest part is understanding the interaction of promotions and non-promotions. Most retailers operate a fairly heavy promotional cycle, and predicting promotions is the biggest challenge. So you're looking at historic data, you're working with your buyer to understand their future plans and future programs, and you're trying to predict your overall demand. And then you're taking that, your ensuring supply, and then you're breaking it down into a store level forecast if you've got physical stores, or these days it's kind of potentially to be a physical or an e-commerce sort of level of demand. And you're trying to create your demand plans based on that. And then you would make sure you've got service from your suppliers to cover that demand and get it out to store in time to meet the kind of customer demand.
And when you kind of were going through those promotional periods and kind of early in your career, do you remember a point where you thought, this is what I want to do, for the rest, not for the rest of my life, you won't commit to that. But was there a point or a project where you thought, I'm good at this and this is what I want to do for the foreseeable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that started a bit earlier in store when I was able to do a bit of the store ordering, and the thing about being in store is you could physically see very quickly whether you had a success or not. So, you would do the store ordering for the weekend, And, you know, you could tell, oh, the weather's come a bit stronger than I planned. And you knew you were going to be facing into a conversation with the store manager. You're looking at the displays going, what happened? And I think that success and failure is it's very exciting. I mean, I got into a situation where I felt that I won more than I lost.
Yeah.
And the thrill of that chase, that adrenaline, that risk became quite addictive. So when I got the role down at central supply chain in Sainsbury's, when you hit a big promotional period, maybe sort of when you hit in the summer period or something like that, I remember, early on getting some real big successes. And when you get availability right, you get strong sales growth. So your buyers, you got a good relationship with your buyer because your buyer's happy. You aim to win 9 out of 10 times. Your supply chain manager's happy. It's quite addictive.
Yeah.
I've sort of almost ended up, I enjoy beating the data almost. Getting it right, personally, is the sort of drug and adrenaline that drives you on. What often comes with supply chain, though, you have to take the bad times. And that's the hard moment because no one wants to fail or disappoint. And it can be quite a tough time to live through, particularly because it can take quite a while before you get the good times again.
During your time in central supply chain at Sainsbury's, are there any kind of failures that you scarred in your mind? Were there any ones that you can still remember now?
I've got a very strong memory, and actually we saved it. I was lucky enough to be given Christmas turkeys.
Is that a blessing or a curse in the supply chain?
It was great for me because they tend to give it to the better forecasters.
Yeah.
So me being sort of, a young, cocky, sort of big-headed forecaster felt, this is great because I've got one of the biggest categories. You don't get Christmas turkeys wrong.
Yeah.
Ruin someone's Christmas and all hell breaks loose and it costs you an absolute fortune. And we did an awful lot of planning and we were heavily reliant on Bernard Matthews. They stood up a big operation to cope with Christmas. They go from almost no turkeys to 600,000 in 5 days. So it's quite a big. It's quite a big operation. Their site completely fell over. They couldn't cope. So I got a call at 11:30 at night from the distribution centre saying, "Where are all the vehicles? None of them arrived." And you've got an entire distribution network waiting for this to happen. Mm-hmm. And you're like, "Oh my, this is kind of serious." We had to quickly move into a crisis management situation and get all of the stakeholders around the table to work out how to rescue this problem. And I think we sorted it out. It was a difficult 5 days. We worked long hours. We were on conference calls until 2 or 3 in the morning and things like that.
And was that finding like different distributors, different ways of getting?
Different ways. Yeah. We sent someone up there from our own distribution. I still keep in touch with him. I messaged him last week and we still reminisce about that time. He left his house in London and stayed the week in Scunthorpe. He was on the ground sorting it out while I was trying to rejig the orders, rejig the replenishment to stores. So for a bit we were okay because you sort of build the stock early. We're trying to actually catch up. We saved it. When we did the post-mortem afterwards, the one thing that becomes quite clear that's important is those relationships you build before the event. We had a good plan and we knew each other. And so that when almost the crisis happened, you could go into a crisis management mode quite quickly and quite easily without having to go through the whole sort of knowing people, what do you do, and all this.
You built the relationship.
So the relationships were built. So actually, when it came into the crisis mode, it was actually pretty easy to execute. The difficult thing was the Bernard Matthews kind of relationship because you want them to come to the party and they're in serious trouble, and that was quite a difficult part of the crisis management, managing that part. Yeah. It was okay at the end.
Differences in supply chain is quite interesting between different sectors. So you're obviously starting out in Sainsbury's, kind of that fresh food, kind of FMCG style of a supply chain, moving into Screwfix, which was your kind of latest position, as we've mentioned. What would you say in the first couple of months at Screwfix, you very quickly realised the differences in those two supply chains?
You know, the maturity that Sainsbury's had in its systems, you know, it was quite remarkable and quite stark. Screwfix was on a sort of growth journey. It had come from quite a small company and rapidly grown, and was still putting in the infrastructure needed. And some of the focus areas weren't necessarily on supply chain systems. They were on core systems for customers, for example.
Yeah.
So actually, it was quite basic what we were doing, and it meant shifting away from a more systemic solution to a more basic, is the spreadsheet right? Is the formulas right? Auditing the formulas, auditing the master data. So it became a really different discipline quite quickly. But over time, we then were able to kind of mature that supply chain to a more systemic based solution.
Was that time, just to kind of go back, when you joined Screwfix, was that at the time where it was part of the Kingfisher Group?
It was, yeah. Kingfisher had bought them quite a while ago, actually, but it was quite a small company.
Right. Okay.
So it was quite a niche player in the Kingfisher kind of and the UK environment. It was very focused on trade. Turnover was quite small compared to B&Q. Kingfisher were evolving their own model. Woolworths by that point had kind of disappeared. I think that they'd owned Superdrug, so they were morphing towards a more of a DIY focus. And they understood DIY, but they were trying to understand Screwfix, which was a trade business.
Yeah. So when you started at Screwfix, what would you say your kind of core responsibilities were in those first few years of being at Screwfix?
Well, I think during that time, what we had a amazing growth. So we were running at 25% like for like. The reality of the core existence and responsibilities was actually just keeping up with that demand and trying to actually put in processes to make it more solid, more sustainable. So a lot of my focus, a lot of things I was working on was, have we purchased enough? Are the purchases big enough? Are we keeping up with the promotions? Are we learning from some of the events we'd been doing? How do we move that forward and build the capability of the team to be able to cope with that?
And was that when you were saying learn from what we've done before? Was that in the beginning, all through spreadsheet? Was that a spreadsheet analyst review? How would you review kind of the historical performance to put a plan together for something in the future?
Well, I mean, they had a forecasting system. Screwfix was evolving from they were the first digital e-commerce retailer. That's all they did, and they then moved into stores, which is kind of the other way round that it traditionally does. So they were very, very good at e-commerce fulfillment, and they were then just learning how to do store replenishment. So they had a system in place to try to do that, but it was quite basic. So we were backing that up with spreadsheets, and that's about as complicated as it got. All your reporting was on Excel-based documents. There was no Power BI. There was no interrogation of data. So it was really basic information that you had that you were trying to use to model your forecasts. So there's quite a lot of people in the team who were trying to create their own bespoke planning systems. Yeah. And bit by bit, we got them better. And they're pretty robust and pretty good things to use.
What you mentioned there around like the going the other way around, like e-commerce to in-store. You have to correct me if I'm wrong here. I got a stat that it was you were opening a store a week or something like that for over 10 years.
Every 6 days.
Every 6 days,
Yeah.
you were opening a new Screwfix store, which is probably giving, raising a lot of supply chain leaders' blood pressure, even thinking about that concept. Talk me through, like, how do you work with the team who's opening a store to make sure you're making sure that they've got enough stock for that opening, like, week? But what does the process look like? Is it a big calendar or a map with pins in, and you're saying, right, we know where it's opening, and this is what the plan is to open that store successfully?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it became quite easy.
It couldn't have been easy in the first bit.
I think we had quite a lot of teething issues.
Yeah.
And errors happen. But we actually had one supply chain colleague whose job was just to open this, to create the stock for the store, and that's solely what they were doing. And I think that was an important decision, because if it became a job which was, I had to do that on a Wednesday, I'm doing my other forecasting on a Tuesday, the store opening could become deprioritised. So we got that in place, and that was a real kind of benefit. And we just really were relentless with the process. We designed a process, and it did evolve. But once that process had been evolved, we just executed it week after week. And if I look back over sort of my time and the amount of stores I opened in my tenure, we went from 200 to 950. So I opened probably 750 stores. I think the amount of issues I had were less than 5.
When you say issues, what would you say, sit down after you've opened one a week later, was that a success or not? What would be the gauge of, that was a successful one, on to the next one? Or, as you said, you had something go wrong 5 times, we need to change the process.
The gauge was that everything that was in the DC that could have been in that store was in the store, in the right, in a reasonable quantity that it should be. Obviously, if you haven't got the product, then you can't put it in the store. We did a few inter-store transfers if necessary. The gauge was, could the customer tell that store was any different from the one down the road that had been open 4 or 5 years? Was there and they couldn't.
750. Wow. Yeah. The 5 errors, like, were they all the same? Were they all the same kind of error? Like, what were those errors?
There's a couple, yeah. There's a couple. The one thing we had that was really difficult to do was you would get a store opening and you could do the core level of replenishment, the standard products that you replenish, and then once you knew the actual date of the opening, you would then have to replenish the promotional package that's happening at that time.
Right. Okay.
It went wrong sometimes where the store had had a problem opening, or we decided to open it early because it was available and we wanted to take as much money as possible. So the promotional package was either the wrong promotional package. There was a moment where someone actually forgot to deliver the promotional package.
Right.
So,
okay.
You get a phone call saying, I just didn't do that tick box. And that is human error.
Yeah.
When you're relying on checklists, it does happen, and you ask that person what happened, and they're gutted, they're annoyed, they can't understand it because they've done it week after week. They can't understand why that happened. So there's no point in berating that person. You have to just say, look, reflect on it. Let's not make that happen again. And what you get from that person in those situations is a real resolute to go and fix the problem, what options they've got. So already when they're phoning you, so I've had this issue, I've started phoning around local stores. This person's going to take that from that store, and so you get like a lot of energy out of a mistake. You often recover the situation
and come out of it probably better than you.
Yeah.
Because the tighter processes, less chances for that to happen.
Yeah. One of the things about supply chain is mistakes can actually be quite beneficial to build on your learning experience. I guess it's the same with many roles, but building that learning experience from mistakes is really positive. You've just got to make sure the mistakes are not too big.
Yeah. The smaller the mistake, the better when it comes to supply chain. It might not have felt like this when you were in there, but everything's changing all at once. What was it like to lead the supply chain through that kind of massive growth period? And what did you learn about like how to manage at pace as well with your team to get the best out of them during that time of volatility and just kind of exponential growth?
I mean, I think it's incredibly exciting. It is very, very good to live through. You don't have much time to rest on your laurels. You're often firefighting issues all of the time. I quite like that. I don't like quiet times. I like to actually have problems to resolve. It can be quite addictive though. So if you're not careful, you become a bit addicted to firefighting.
Yeah.
So, one of the sort of evolutions of my sort of leadership growth was trying to make sure that I was thinking about the long term and thinking about the processes that need to change and the system developments that we need to make based on where the company was going and where it was going to end up, and you're trying to predict what's going to happen before it's happened. And I think that was a big part of my sort of leadership kind of growth. And I sort of then sort of pivoted to really focusing on building my team to execute the day-to-day, to do the firefighting, to solve all the problems, to try the best to remove me out of that situation. It wasn't always successful. Often in supply chain, there's things that are wrong.
Yeah.
And you often get asked about those, and that can take your attention away if you're not careful from the long-term kind of growth and planning of supply chain.
When you kind of were trying to take yourself out of that day-to-day with the team, like reactive nature of the role, how did you manage your kind of expectations of the team and like the meeting cadence, and how did you know that they were doing the job? Was it daily check-ins, weeklies? You had a project management tool that you use. Like, how did you use kind of that formula to kind of keep an eye on what your team was doing and making sure that they were on the right track?
I mean, I played around with lots of things, and I think as a leader, you often flip-flop and move around, and it can be tempting to put too much control on your team. As someone that's worked in supply chain, you've got a great deal of knowledge about how to do things. You can, if you're not careful, try to implant your decision making onto your team and make it all about your decisions. And I think most people probably go through a little bit of a journey on that. And what you realize quite quickly is you run out of time, or that's all you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's not very sustainable because you're not getting your team to learn and grow. So I tried to take a laid back approach to my, it might sound like I'm not around, laid back, slow. It's not, it's more letting the team make decisions and asking for my advice when they get stuck, and advising and helping and probing and checking, have you thought about this thing? When you mention that problem, what about that issue? And that I think that creates a great deal of sort of growth and capability improvements in your team.
Yeah, and probably trust as well.
Yeah, trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you micromanage your team, you make them jumpy, you make them worry about too many things, you make them worry that they're going to get 5 emails in the morning or overnight while you're working. People then tend to, I feel, not, make good decisions. So the best leader is the one that can take a bit of a step back and look at the overall supply chain, think about the overall long-term growth of the supply chain, and if they can, not get involved in too many of the day-to-day decisions.
Yeah. Got two follow-on questions from what you've just said there around, I'll go with one of them around when you took yourself out of kind of that day-to-day role and you gave yourself permission to look at the strategic, long-term future. What was one of the, say, most successful projects or like implementations that when you could look at that 3 to 5 year strategic plan of Screwfix and you thought, we can't deliver that because of this thing, we need to go and fix this thing before we do that? What would you say is kind of the example that comes to mind when you look at that growth and there was a project that you had to deliver, whether it be tech or team or, what was that for you?
Yeah, I think there's a tech project that comes to mind that I still talk about a lot. When I was talking about the lack of systems, because we'd gone from being a digital retailer to a physical retailer, we used to replenish our stores each day on Excel spreadsheets. Someone would start the day and they would kind of go, I've got this size of vehicle, therefore I've got this much cubic capacity, I've got this much demand. How do I best fit that onto that vehicle? And they'd do it for 8 hours, and then they would come in the next day and do it for 8 hours again. And it was relentless and horrible work. And every time we opened a store, obviously that level of work increased.
Yeah.
And it's all very well in maybe normal times, your demands sitting nice and trundling along, but then you get quite busy and you get too much demand to fit into a vehicle, and Screwfix has got quite a rigid fixed network because of small stores, obviously delivery restrictions, quite small store capacity, so you couldn't just ramp up. So what we'd end up with in really busy times is a real big backlog of product that we just couldn't work out how to get out, and each day you would want this thing to improve. And the person doing the spreadsheet would probably try and get rid of the excess demand there and forget about the core product because they couldn't fit it all on. So we realised that we needed to put a system in place to deal with this, and it felt like, well, this should be quite a simple thing to do. And we started talking to a few companies that we still reflect on it now. The company was like, yeah, we can do this. We've done it elsewhere. This would be quite easy. We'd probably take 3 to 6 months to do this. It took 2 years, and they didn't realise the complexity of our operation, how difficult it was to develop a system that could almost think for itself and decide when I've got too much to fit on a vehicle. So they had to, with our guidance, program a system to think. So it's kind of almost emerging AI. If I put these products on, I'm going to please the availability metric. But if I put these products on, I'm going to I'm going to please the P&L metric. It's much more profitable to put these products on. Worse availability, which one do you want me to choose? And that's quite a difficult calibration for supply chain because, your focusability is the key. But availability doesn't necessarily, it's not a be all and end all metric. So we had to program a system to think in a way of a P&L rather than availability. When we first implemented it, just got it wrong. So we had to tweak, and we created a system which you can just tweak a dashboard and make it think slightly different.
I am going to come back to my other question about KPIs because you just touched on it there around P&L priorities versus availability and how to get that right. I will come back to that. But I guarantee when you were saying about they promised it would take 3 to 6 months and it took 2 years, any supply chain leader listening right now is nodding aggressively that they've probably been through that and got some scar tissue from it. What have you learned from that procurement process if you're going into another role and another project like this comes up where you think this is a big, big technology project, what are the questions that you're like, I have to ask those now to avoid this is going to take 3 months, 2 years later, and it's still not quite right?
I think that's quite difficult because whenever you get a pitch, with all due respect to those companies, they want the business.
Yeah.
So, if I was in that situation, you're trying to paint the best picture you possibly can. And often you don't have the time to go through with like in an autopsy to understand whether it's proven or not. And sometimes you have to take a little bit of a leap of faith.
Yeah.
And I think I've just sort of taught myself a little bit, don't listen to words, get into the data and really understand the data in a lot more detail. The problem with the one we did, it'd never been done before for any company because we were very individual with our requirements. So it was a theoretical problem.
Program of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what we could have agreed, some of the challenges we had was that because it was such a long project, they were moving people onto other projects and we lost some of the early capability and the early knowledge. Agreeing some simple principles of we have our implementation team, they stay with it right from start to finish was definitely a kind of learning thing for us. I guess don't often listen to the first budget, double it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is normally double it, treble it is normally the best way. And then that'll give you a guide of how much it's going to cost. I've not yet done a system implementation where the predicted results have actually happened in the first time you put it live. You have to prepare the business that there's probably going to be some
like teething to a time of adjustment.
Yeah, and you have to rally around that period and make sure you're focused on, we are going to make this happen.
Yeah.
You do need this, but we just have to get through this period and let's, hold it together.
Keeping the business focused on what's the cost of not doing this and keep that front in mind because it's probably be quite easy to slip into why did we even start this project in the first place. It's good. Obviously being on the technology side, I think a good question for not just supply chain leaders, but anyone going through that period of we're going to go into a replatforming or new system or something like that, whoever's doing it, ask them the question on what do you foresee being the issues of this implementation? And if it's crickets, then not to trust them. And then also kind of talk me through a project where it's gone twice or three times over the initial time frame that you said, and why did that happen? And again, if you get an honest response and what they've learned from it, it comes back to your relationship point as well. Of if they come back and it's an honest response around that, you kind of have some trust there on you're not just putting something in front of me to get me to sign. There is a level of respect and kind of that mutual trustworthiness, which you can kind of rely on in month 9 or a year when it's not going that well, or hopefully when it is implemented. But we were going back to the KPI question because that's something that I am fascinated by because it's different in every single business. What were some of your core KPIs, maybe downstream, that you were keeping, making sure that things were happening as they should, with your team? And then what were some of the core KPIs that you would report to the board or the management meetings every month? What were the things that you had on your dashboard that that you were keeping a track of, so you could answer the question, how's the supply chain performing this month?
I mean, I think the board reporting tends to be quite traditional. You would have 2 or 3 availability metrics, normally a core availability, like an e-commerce availability, and probably then your key line kind of availability. So they would kind of be reported. And they were, sometimes there'd be some supplementary KPIs on there, such as sort of stock holding, stock turn, stock value, and of the like. You probably wouldn't go much beyond that. I think once you go beyond that, you're into sort of quite sort of detailed supply chain metrics. Track. I think lower down, you were right. Each company has an indicator. There's a couple that I like. Certainly one that I liked, which I did daily, and that was I looked at my sales volume and the amount that I was replenishing out to stores. That was a key indicator for me, particularly during periods like if my sales are ramping up. So Screwfix busiest period starts from September until February, which is a little bit inverse just to a normal DIY retailer. And you knew as soon as you hit September, the first week in September, your sales would ramp up really quickly, and you'd be prepared for it, but you'd be wanting to see that your replenishment was keeping up with that. And if it kind of wasn't, you need to move pretty quickly, because as soon as you get behind with the Screwfix challenges I talked about constrained network, constrained deliveries to store, you got into a real problem. What I wanted was an indicator to tell me that if I don't do something really, or the team doesn't do something really quite rapidly, in 2, 3, 4 weeks' time, the likelihood of availability would be dropping was clear. I got so much clarity on these metrics that I could calibrate what was going to happen very quickly. And often what you tend to find then, you talk to your team about it, and what you sometimes get is a bit of denial, a bit of we're fine, availability is great. But what you want is like a core metric underneath to tell you that maybe the health of the company is not kind of
where you think it is.
Yeah. So that was one of the metrics. I mean, some of the other metrics which were very key was around your stock health. Managing your stock health is incredibly important, particularly in the DIY kind of industry. You can tend to have a lot of terminal stock. If you're not clearing down your ex promotions, it can clog up your system. So I tended to focus on those quite a lot to make sure they were kind of being managed.
Well, and you've got the cost of holding those goods as well.
Yeah.
That is, I think when you were saying around availability, and pretty much every KPI that you were talking about there would be a KPI or an indicator that the finance team or the CFO is going to care about, because that's cash position, that's money on shelves. From my experience, a successful high-performing business, you have to have a very good relationship between the supply chain leader, the person who has the responsibility of supply chain performance, and the CFO. Talk to me about what you think is key for a good relationship between a supply chain leader and your CFO. And not saying in your experience, but things you might have seen that have led to a poor one as well, of where, the relationship's not as good as it has to be.
I mean, I'm lucky, actually. I'd say that my relationship with the CFO and the finance team in Screwfix was my strongest relationship. And I think that if I was to reflect on why that was, there's a couple of things come to mind. I think that openness and honesty is very important in that relationship. You often, in supply chain, things can potentially go wrong from a cash perspective or stock perspective. It's important to be open and honest to your finance colleagues to let them know what's going on, so they don't get any surprises. But I think on the other side as well, the one thing that what you would want coming back, businesses often have multiple views of what they think they're going to take. There's normally official ones, unofficial ones. It's a real challenge for supply chain, because you're trying to work on a plan, and sometimes you're not actually working on the right one.
Yeah.
So I'd often rely on my supply to sort of inform me what's going on at a board level when it comes to that. Maybe we're thinking that we're going to increase our sales for you, but we don't want to do it yet. So that sort of early warning, early indication sign is a really important part of that kind of relationship foundation. And I think, when things go wrong, I've got plenty of examples. You have to come together as a team and kind of work through it. As I said, that was my strongest relationship. So I that worked really well.
Yeah. I have to now ask you what one of those examples was that, a challenge has arisen and you've come together.
We did have a system issue with some inventory recording.
Yeah.
So we couldn't understand it, but some of our inventory accuracy wasn't right.
Yeah.
And we were carrying more value than we actually were. And we couldn't work out where it was being created. And there was something in our processes that was making this inventory, whenever we sold something, not disappear. And then we bought more. And there was something wrong with the process that we needed to get hold of.
Yeah.
And it created a real challenge for me because I was targeted on a inventory value.
Yeah.
And I was carrying a fairly big, over 7-figure sum.
Yeah.
Of inaccurate inventory, but then potentially could constrain my purchasing.
Yeah.
So that was a kind of prime example where we had to come together as a team. We both had a motivation to get this sorted and understand it. And, the team worked very closely together to try to get that kind of resolved.
And it almost comes back to what you said around relationships with suppliers, your team and everyone. Like, the stronger that relationship is, the quicker you can cut through not the niceties, but you can get down to the problem solving a lot quicker than if you didn't have that close relationship at the beginning. Because you'd have to go through that whole, there'd probably be a bit of blame, there'd probably be some back and forth, and then you get on solving the problem. Whereas having that open and honest relationship at the start, you kind of just can get on with the problem solving.
Yeah, I think it's vital. Whenever I had a problem, the first thing I did was phone my finance equivalent.
Yeah.
And when you've got that, you fess up.
Yeah.
Open and honest. Can I have a coffee?
Yeah.
It does break down.
Yeah. Well, that's a good, for anyone watching, listening, like, how comfortable are you picking up the phone to your finance lead is probably a good indicator of how well that relationship, how strong that relationship is. I want to talk about AI and data, but I can't have the Screwfix supply chain lead here and not talk about COVID, because Screwfix, I think, as we talked about before, was on the face of it, one of the leading lights of British retail, I think, of like how Screwfix handled COVID and the processes that were put in place really quickly to enable a DIY boom that happened, during that time. Obviously, it's quite a few years ago now, nearly 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, just over 6 years, which is scary in itself. When you were going through that time and in Screwfix were going through that time, in a supply chain role during that time, you obviously figured something out and you figured stuff out so quickly. Like, how did you even start with that whole process of going to this new world of what Screwfix looked like from, February 2020?
What really helped Screwfix was some of its DNA. If you reverse back quite a long time into the past, it was quite small and was able to do things very, very quickly. And it would try things, it would often fail. There was very much a nimbleness. And quite a few of those people were still in the business. So when it came to understanding how are we going to do retail and still comply with, government expectations. So very quickly, the retail director came up with, let's put a pasting table out the front. Mm-hmm. Customers can't then go in the store. They can't turn up without an order.
Yeah.
So that means we can control the number of people coming by the hour. And little things like that didn't need anybody to sort of run through the process and sign them off. And literally, I got a phone call. How many pasting tables have we got in the business? Take them from stock. Can we do enough of them? I'll need 300 more. Right, I know where I can get them for you. And then it's implemented within a couple of days.
Yeah, that's amazing.
There was quite a lot of sort of examples of that. We quickly hit a real problem with the amount of demand that we had and trying to keep up with that. And I've talked about some of the constraints in Screwfix, and we had to come up with novel ways of selling some of the things that we weren't allowed to sell in a traditional way, and distribute in a traditional way. A nice example is about picking in a distribution centre. It's all very well picking up a small box of screws, but when it comes to picking up a heavy lift, you need 4 people. You couldn't have people close enough to be able to pick that product up.
Yeah.
Now, it just so happens in a couple of our distribution centres, there's quite families that work there. So we created what is known as a family group. People that lived in the same house or travelled in the same car, where then they'd already been close together. So they could then...
They were put on the job. They were on the pick run, which included the big jobs.
So it was the control of that family group. But that was another example that was done really quickly and didn't need to go through the kind of the sign-offs and the processes and, you know, some of those things. So there's lots of examples of that, which basically meant that quite quickly we were able to sort of keep up with the huge demand that we were getting. But it was a difficult time. You know, I had to live through very, very poor KPIs. Yeah. So although the P&L was looking good on the sales front, I was staring at a fairly terrible availability position each morning, and that's quite demotivating for the team. You're basically working very hard to, if you're lucky, to stand still.
Yeah, I feel like I speak on behalf of like the British public at that time, and just thank you for getting the stuff there, because you kept a lot of people sane, I think, during that time. It's impressive to see from the outside a big business operate with that nimbleness and that flexibility. I think that's a lesson for everyone of, if it's best for the customer and it's best for the business, what can you do to just get it done quickly rather than think of reasons why you can't do them. Yeah. We're going to finish off with AI and data. It's obviously it feels like a red hot topic for years and years now. And we'll start off with your honest read of AI right now in the supply chain, of genuine progress versus like reskinned old BI tools. Of like, what's your take on the AI in the supply chain and what it's doing to evolve the function?
AI is tagged to many things. You used to get like people send you emails about systems, and then 3 weeks later it'd be the same system. It'd just be AI driven. Has anything?
The prefix of AI.
Has anything truly changed about those systems? You know, so there's a bit of skepticism about what is actually true and changed, and I haven't seen yet a credible case where there's a real step forward. But I guess you need to move in steps. Yeah. AI in some respects has always existed in supply chain, in that a lot of the mathematical tools that, you know, a lot of the forecasting algorithms have got machine learning as part of their data set. You know, and a lot of those theories have been established for many, many years, and the implementation of those is where a system becomes effective or not, and how it can think and what to use at certain times. So that's always existed. So I think there's a long way to go. AI can look at past data, and if you gave AI past data and asked it to predict the future, it may be accurate at times. Maybe inaccurate. It may be more accurate than a user at times. But what it can't do is take a look at the future and calibrate based on some of the conversations you might have had that week, or where the business is going. It can't consume that level of data at the moment.
Yeah, it's almost like what you said around logically, this is what your business should do. Yeah. But you've had a conversation with someone around the future position or the position of the business that we'd like to achieve in 3 months. So that then input the context hasn't been applied to AI. And I feel like that is right, specifically in the supply chain, because there's so many siloed data sets, moving parts, conversations that are happening. The context is the key area where you could probably go down some real rabbit holes, AI-powered rabbit holes, without that context. And then that could put your business into, you think you're making the right decision on the back of the data.
Yeah.
But actually, without the context, you're not making the right decision at all.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of technological change all the time, and the human judgment of that technological change and the impact that's going to have and how quickly that will ramp up. That's very difficult, I think, for an AI engine to understand and predict accurately. Often those things come down to a judgment call. Often it comes down to what's your inventory position at the time. Am I in a good position? Can I afford to be riskier? Or am I risk averse? Like you mentioned, you can't calibrate that in a system. Where it can help, when it comes to trawling through massive points of data, a forecaster will be managing potentially 1,000 SKUs. There is definitely a opportunity of something to trawl through that data, tell the user where they should go and look, where the issues occur, or if a forecaster does some planning and gets an individual store wrong versus its historic, there's definitely some use cases.
Like, we see it all the time around stock on the water when it's arriving, if it's going to be arriving on time, multiplied out by thousands of containers at one point traveling across the world. Like, you have to have some sort of AI behind that to make the right recommendations, to give you the right insight. Otherwise, you're just relying on humans at that scale. There are going to be mistakes, and they probably haven't got the historical knowledge of what happened 2 years ago here to give a bit more of an informed decision. So I mean,
that's a good example to pick up on. Whenever I got told, you get told there's a late container of a promotion that was due to arrive quite late, you then say, how many stores can you hit for launch? And then you would wait while someone tried to calculate that.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it could take a day.
Yeah.
If you push that through an AI model and said, I can do this, and it might be better if you focus on 250 stores,
the overall objective is still this. Yeah. What would you suggest as our next step for our next best action on? Replenish these 200 stores with these products, take them from here. This is the best outcome, or the best kind of set of events that I believe, the AI believes, to hit that objective, and then you can make the judgment call from that.
I think the human would get there, but you can give the human back a great deal of time, rather than they wouldn't be doing anything else while they're doing all these calculations.
Yeah, that's it, and that's, as as part of Beacon, that's truly what we see the future of, like, AI in the supply chain being a co-worker, confidant, someone next to you that you can ask questions to. And we've got the next question here is, imagine if you could talk to your supply chain. That's kind of what we're driving towards, this kind of, you can talk to your supply chain. What would be the one question that you would ask your supply chain if you could ask it anything about performance? Or obviously it would be different in different times, but what would be a question that you've always been wanting to know about your supply chain?
You always want to know the current, where you are now or in the future. So often you get a static view of your supply chain and it's already out of date. So you kind of, one of the great questions I would be asking in my supply chain would be, what are all the things that need to happen to make me hit my availability target in 4 weeks, 4 weeks time?
Yeah.
What are the things that are not happening that you would recommend
for me to do, or the team to do?
Yeah. And that's what you're kind of looking for, to be able to just type that question, because you've got a big team and you're often asking individuals what's going on in your area, and they would have a number of people connected to those, to them, that they got to go and ask. And
as you said, the data is pretty much always, if it's in a spreadsheet, it's going to be static, and therefore it's out of date immediately as it's inputted.
Yeah.
I guarantee there will be a lot of technology companies sliding into your DMs with, we can solve that problems after this goes out. So I apologise for that. wrapping up now, last couple of questions. What do you think the industry is getting wrong and getting right now in supply chain?
I think that you should always focus on the customer, and it goes without saying, but you can tell when a company's forgotten about its customer and is focusing too much on its P&L, for example. You can walk around a store, and I'm a great believer in being out looking at the physical store rather than the data. And you walk around maybe later at night and the shelves are half empty because they're staffing, they've toned down their staffing, or you walk into a returns desk and there's kind of a big queue. That is often an early warning that something has gone wrong in your sort of supplying, in your replenishment, or you've basically you've forgotten about the customer.
Yeah.
I think that all of the successful retailers are relentlessly focused on their customer and what the customers want. Never forget that, and don't let P&L distractions or cost distractions move away from that.
Yeah, I think that's so key, of losing sight of your customer is a one-way ticket to basically everything will decline from there. So loyalty, repeat purchases, etc. If they're not there's so much competition now, and not just competition from competitors, but competition on disposable cash being so limited. Your competitors now are essentially everyone. It's not just people who are next to you in that same industry, because you're competing for the disposable cash of your customer, which now, given everything that's happening, is kind of smaller than it's ever been. So if they're not being satisfied, then you can't really look too far ahead, because that customer's not going to be a customer of yours for too long.
I think that your prime example of this is the value of next day fulfillment, and fulfillment through a fantastic delivery partner.
Yeah.
And I always, I think it's downplayed as to how valuable that next day fulfillment is. It's expensive, but I think and if you go with a really good distribution partner that offers a really good quality of service, I think it pays back.
Yeah.
I think that's just one of the prime examples I'd kind of...
Yeah, like almost, expectations and hygiene of service is a differentiator now, or the expectations of minimum standards of expectation have gone up so much. If you're not providing next day delivery, as you said, you're kind of already giving up quite a big market share of customers that expect that and want that, and they can just go somewhere else. It's been a pleasure, Kevin. I've got one last question before we wrap up. What's the one bit of advice that you would give someone who's looking to get into supply chain? And it can't be don't. There's someone that is, keen to start a career in supply chain. What's the bit of advice that you'd give them?
A couple of things, if I may. I think never forget about the physical side of what you're doing, and actually go and visualize what the results that you are getting, and don't rely on a spreadsheet to tell you how good you are.
Because you were saying you used to send your team into store to spend time in store on that example.
Yeah, exactly. And I think at the moment you forget about that, you're not seeing what a customer is actually seeing. So that's one bit of advice. I think the second thing is to make sure you've got a breadth of experience and try different areas, different sectors, because they all behave differently and they've all got their own different aspects and ways of working to them, which then brings up your overall capability and understanding as you move through your career.
Awesome. Great. I've got nothing else. Kevin, thank you so much for the time.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.